All right, problem number 1. We have this problem up here on the board. Remember, with these types of problems, the first thing we want to do is get one side equal to 0. Now, it doesn't matter which side is equal to 0. In this case, I would prefer to get the right side equal to 0 because I know that if I move this over here, I'm going to get a positive secant squared. And that'll make it easier to factor. So let's add 2 secant squared theta to both sides. So over here we get negative secant squared plus 2 secant squared is positive secant squared theta. And then the rest of this plus secant theta equals 2. And now to finish getting it equal to 0, let's subtract 2 from both sides. So we get secant squared theta plus secant theta minus 2 equals 0. All right, now let's factor this. So we're going to put our parentheses here. We know that the first factors have to multiply to secant squared theta. And so to do that, we need secant theta on both sides. And we know that our last factors need to multiply to 2, and so that's got to be 2 and 1. But then our middle factors, 2 secant and 1 secant, have to add to positive 1 secant. And so we're going to make the larger number positive. So we're going to secant plus 2 and secant theta minus 1 equals 0. Now the zero product property says that we can set each of these separately equal to 0. So secant theta plus 2 is equal to 0. And then we'll set this equal to 0. Secant theta minus 1 equals 0. And now subtract 2 from both sides. We get secant theta equals negative 2. And secant theta over here, we'll add 1 to both sides, equals 1. All right, now let me make some room here. And we'll transfer these up to the top. So we get secant theta equals negative 2 and secant theta equals 1. All right. Now, since secant is not on your unit circle, we want to turn this into sine or cosine. So secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So let's write that there. 1 over cosine is equal to negative 2. So we've just replaced secant with 1 over cosine. And over here we'll do the same thing with this secant. And now let's take the reciprocal of both sides. So 1 over cosine, we flip that over, we get cosine. And the reciprocal of negative 2 is going to be negative 1 over 2, or negative 1/2. Over here, we get cosine, and the reciprocal of 1 is just 1. Now we can take the inverse cosine. So theta is going to be equal to the inverse cosine of negative 1/2. And if we go onto our unit circle, cosine is going to be negative 1/2 at 2 pi over 3 and at 4 pi over 3. And then cosine, when cosine theta is equal to 1, theta is going to be 0. And so those are our 3 answers there. Theta equals 2 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, and 0.